Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to PwC's press conference for the launch of our APEC CEO survey. We're delighted to be here in the Philippines. This is my first visit to Manila, and I'm enjoying it greatly. PwC is a big supporter of APEC, and as you may know, is the exclusive knowledge partner of the APEC CEO Summit, a task that we've undertaken for the last 5 or 6 years, and we're delighted to be acting in that role. We have 14 of our partners from around the world joining us at the summit, and Dennis Nally, our global chairman, is participating in the opening plenary of that summit later on today. What we're going to do today is we're going to present the results to you of our APEC CEO survey. This is a survey that we designed in conjunction with the organizing committee of the APEC CEO Summit. We've been doing this for the last 5 years. I think you'll find the results fascinating. It's been a particularly interesting year in terms of global events and movements in the global economy, and you'll see some of that reflected in the CEO confidence levels as you'll see in the survey today. So in terms of today's format, we're going to be joined on stage by David Wu, who's our regulatory leader from China and the head of our Beijing office. And he's going to join in for questions at the end. But Alex Cabrera, our senior partner from the Philippines, is going to present the results to you. The presentation will take around about 15 minutes. Then afterwards, there will be plenty of time for questions, both to Alex and to David. And we also have other colleagues in the room who are very deeply involved in the design and development of the report. If you have any specific data questions, we'll probably take those afterwards rather than dwell on specific numbers. But do ask any questions you like. And if anybody wants any time afterwards for a one-to-one interview or a more detailed discussion, we will all be around for some time afterwards to help you out with that. So without any further ado, I'll invite David to come onto the stage, and Alex will take us through the presentation.
Morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. You know, the last 6 months have been very challenging for all of the APEC economies. That is why it is so timely for us to understand and learn how the CEOs are feeling about their prospects and how the new clouds in the horizon are affecting their decision making. This year, we interviewed 800 CEOs from 52 countries, done in 6 languages. This effort is the largest that we have done since the last 5 years where we started the CEO survey. What we have seen in this 2015 CEO survey is that in the short term and in the medium term, the CEOs see that the confidence level in business has dropped a little bit. The reason for that is that when the U.S. Federal Reserves raised their interest rates, and there was a slowdown in the China economy, this resulted to perceptions that the revenue will slow down as well in the following year. The level of confidence per country in the APEC economies vary. China, Japan, and the US suffered the largest drop in optimism. Mid-sized businesses suffer some drop in optimism as well because they're so familiar with their domestic economies, but they're less familiar with the new markets that they expanded into. And this has caused some drop in confidence insofar as the prospects in their businesses in other countries are concerned. The CEOs don't only look at financial volatility, slowdown in the business in China in trying to decide on the investment risks that they will take. Some are real risks that they look at. Cyber threat that can ruin their virtual infrastructure, natural disasters that can damage their trading and manufacturing hubs, the geopolitical tension, such as the one persisting in the South China Sea, all impact on their investment decision making. But on a positive note, insofar as their investment is concerned, the investment is now more dispersed, probably because also of the slowdown in China. They're investing more on a spread basis across the APEC economies. Of course, China, US, and Indonesia, they remain the main draws, but not far behind is Vietnam and the Philippines and Thailand. If there's anything optimistic about how the CEOs feel, this optimism is in relation to technology. The CEOs see technology will drive modernization in the in APEC, and you will see R&D spending being done more in the APEC economies. Before technology comes from elsewhere and manufacturing happens in the APEC economies. But today, the CEOs are seeing that the technology itself will be developed in the APEC economies. And the APEC economies will be manufacturing. The manufacturing leverage will not only come from the efficient costs of manufacturing here in the region, it will also come from intangible property being developed in the region. They see the sharing economy will continue to be a game changer, because different assets will be traded over internet platforms. If there's any message to political leaders from the CEOs, it's probably that they see that the mega regional game changer is not the global agreements, it's the regional agreements. Their big bet is the Asian Economic Cooperation. Their other big bet is the Trans-Pacific Agreement. Inclusive growth is a big buzzword in the Philippines, but across APEC economies, this is likewise an aspiration. In fact, a lot of initiative has gone in on inclusive growth. But the CEOs see that the key to inclusive growth is the expanding education, expanding quality education as the greatest enabler. Improvement in the transport systems is an enabler also for them for inclusive growth, because you can't go to school if you don't have efficient transport systems, for instance. Access to financial markets for SMEs. They can't set up and expand their business without access to financial services. And of course, access to power and healthcare services. All keys to inclusive growth. Let's go to some Philippine-centric perceptions or views from our CEOs. These are views not only of Philippine CEOs, but even international CEOs with responsibilities in the Philippines. If you see that other territories, APEC economies rather, see that the growth in revenue is slowing down, I think the uniqueness in the Philippines is that it's the only economy that really feels that there's really a bright future insofar as revenue is concerned. 51% of Philippine CEOs are very confident about revenue growth aspects, in fact. That's just 51% versus 28% over the rest of APEC. So Philippines is really distinctive in that regard. Insofar as Philippine CEOs are concerned, their neighbors are the favorite investment destinations. Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand are favorite investment destinations for Philippine CEOs. But they remain very cautious, like 51% of them remain very cautious about investing today. The demand for services will be huge, but the demand for services will be related to the demand for IT services and risk reduction services. This is related to a heightened awareness on the effects of disaster. And there's a lot of activities going on right now on how to make investments disaster risk sensitive and how to utilize technology in counteracting the risks. Believe it or not, the CEOs share with us our common fear of internet disruption. And of course, a common fear as well is the natural disaster, and this stops their threats actually. How do they see Asia Pacific in the year 2020? They see that there's less barrier to services. Skilled labor will be more accessible across the region. And then new technologies will proliferate, particularly technologies in robotics, the Internet of Things, and 3D printing will have a great impact on the manufacturing process. They also accept that the businesses have a large impact or large influence in developing the middle class. You see, the interest in developing the middle class or doing something for inclusive growth is not purely a social function. It has a very legitimate business function. The middle class are their customers, and the middle class is their key to growth in their business. And if they grow the middle class, then they grow their business. Like the rest of the Asia Pacific CEOs, the Philippine CEOs believe that upgrading education and transport systems are key to inclusive growth. And on that note, we're ready to take questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. That was very, very helpful. Very good news for the Philippines there. Obviously, people are feeling very positive about the Filipino economy. We're all here in APEC this week spending lots of money, so that's probably not entirely surprising. So let's take some questions. If you wouldn't mind, there's a microphone just at the front here, and I know that a couple of people are actually broadcasting the press conference. So if you could come to the front and use the microphone to ask your question, that would be very helpful. If you could just say where you're from before you begin, that would be excellent.
Celerina Monte from the Daily Manila Shimbun, a Japanese newspaper. Sir, you have mentioned that one of the concerns is the issue on the South China Sea. How big is that concern with regard to this survey?
Well, the geopolitical tension ranks high, although it's not the highest concern. The higher concern are the natural disasters and cyber security. But next to that is geopolitical tensions. And this CEO survey was in fact secured. I mean, we interviewed the CEOs before that event in Paris. And you can imagine that that will also have some trickle effect.
Like how many % is that South China Sea?
Say that again, sorry.
How many % the South China Sea issue?
We can find that data point for you later on and give it to you. David, did you have any observations on that particular question?
No, we didn't separate that as an issue, but I think geopolitical certainly is a concern on the minds of the CEOs when they are allocating their resources. I actually just perhaps take this opportunity to just introduce a little bit more of this report. If you turn, usually we say top 10 issues from the number 1 to number 10, but actually it's very interesting if you go to number 10 and then go back. If you go to page 27, as Alex has mentioned, if you see, we have 800 CEOs, and 70% of them and above think, improved transportation, expand access to high quality education at all levels and issues for a better society. And I think these are really important area. You know, you can see how the CEOs focus on for the future high quality national growth. The second last, if you go through, is the 25th page. And the 25th page, you know, this year's theme for the APEC is inclusive growth. And if you have a look of this diagram, you will see, you know, 34% versus 39%. 34%, you know, add-ons 23 to 11 actually agree and strongly agree that lowering barriers to trade and investment will significantly harm small and medium-sized enterprises. And the remaining, you know, the other is 39% disagree with that. So this is what PwC do. We actually take the CEO's view and present that to the political leaders so that they can make better policy decisions to support the regional development. I think these are the points I want to share with the journalists. And thank you so much for coming in such an early time.
Great, thank you, David. And I think that's a very good point. Obviously, there are some very clear messages in the report to the political leaders who are meeting this week in Manila, particularly around education and infrastructure. And obviously, CEOs' views are divergent around the benefits of trade, with some significantly feeling that it can actually harm business as well as others believing it can benefit it. So let's take another question. Who's got the next question? There, the lady in red. If you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone, that would be helpful.
Malaya newspaper. It appears that the Philippines is among or one of the most very confident country in terms of revenue growth as among the CEOs. Can you just, Mr. Cabrera, if you could just give us an insight of where this optimism is coming from? And the average has been very high the past 5 years. And second question is, there's this slide about investments growing from the Philippines. Is that internal or is that outward investment?
Well, I hesitate to say that Filipinos are eternally optimistic, you know. But if you will try to look at find a distinction between the Philippines and the other APEC economies so far in 2015, one of that is APEC has come to town, and the government itself has prepared itself to spend 10 billion pesos on this APEC event, and they are expecting returns from this very important global event. And this really brings to highlight, you know, not only the beauty of the Philippines, but the economic prospects in the country. And this will hopefully convince more investors to come and place their bets in the country.
My other question is about the slide about outward investments coming from the Philippines. Is that going to be internally infused, or is that for overseas investments?
Well, there's always a good mix of those investments. In large part, those investments are coming domestically, but foreign investments, insofar as that is concerned, you saw from the CEO's points of view, their favorite destinations are U.S., China, and Indonesia, but the Philippines is not far behind, along with Vietnam and Thailand. So there will be a large chunk coming also from foreign investments.
Yeah, I think that's right, Alex. That's very encouraging news for the Philippines. Obviously, the US and China always top the league in terms of investment prospects, but for the Philippines, it's a very good story from this year's survey. A question from the gentleman there. You wouldn't mind just coming up to the microphone? I think that would help everybody else hear the question.
I'm Victor Saudon from Business World. I have two questions. How would you compare the level of confidence of the CEOs of the Philippines this year and the previous year? I understand you've been doing this since 2011. And my other question is, what does it say about regional integration when one country's level of confidence is so much in contrast with its neighbors?
I'll take a first crack, and my colleagues can also come in. Well, I think insofar as the comparison with last year, The Philippines' confidence about revenue growth, I think, is exceptional. But insofar as their confidence in the medium term is concerned, there's also some cautiousness that can be felt on that, along with the rest of the CEOs in the APEC economies. Like to add anything to that?
What's the second question? Would you?
Regional integration, it's a big
Yeah.
discussion here
Yeah.
during APEC summit.
Yeah.
And I just want to know, what does it say about regional integration? I mean, one country's level of confidence is so much in contrast with its neighbors. Aren't they supposed to be pulling each other
I
up?
see. Yeah, the second question. Well, insofar as regional integration is concerned, I think that has continued to be one of the positive things that the CEOs have imparted in the survey. They're quite optimistic about the integration, although it wouldn't be effective in the short term. But they're really looking forward that this integration will be assisted by these regional agreements, trade agreements, like the ASEAN Economic Cooperation and the Trans-Pacific Agreement. So regardless of the level of confidence affected by volatility in the financial market, affected by geopolitical tensions or natural disasters, the APEC CEOs believe that regional connectivity, in fact, is the key to success in this region.
I think the other thing is, I mean, you always see differences within a region, whichever region you look at in the world, because there are differences in political policy, in monetary policy, in your access to natural resources, in the state of your labor market. So although regional connectivity is incredibly important, I think any region that we look at in the world, if you look at the Eurozone region, you will see huge differences in confidence levels, because there are still differences in domestic policy that are quite significant across any region. So I think it is an issue for politicians to discuss, but I suspect we will continue to see those sorts of differences for quite some time into the future.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question on the regional integration, but the confidence overall, actually, it decreased quite significantly, and that indicates the complexity of the economics that the CEOs are operating, and I think this we need to acknowledge. And this is important because not only some geopolitical issues, but also technology, shortage of labor, shortage of skilled labor, and also China's economic slowdown. All this creates complexity in the region, and we see the challenges the CEOs are facing.
Let's take another question. Lady here in the front. You wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone?
Hi, good morning. I'm Mads Miraflor, Manila Bulletin. I understand that the confidence of CEO towards business growth is at the lowest level. I'm just curious, what was the growth recorded last year, and what were the drivers last year that were no longer? Thank you. Christina
was the author of the report. Do you want to take that particular question? It's what was the drivers of the confidence levels last year, and what's the difference do we see between this year and last year? Do you want to go to the microphone just?
Last year, the economy was kind of recovering from the Eurozone crisis. There was a little bit of an optimism, some optimism for regional economic integration. Also, a lot about kind of the unfolding of the benefits of digital technologies, the sharing economy that Alex mentioned, spotting the opportunities for being on those online marketplaces that match individual buyers with sellers, be it in retail goods, for example, or even in services. So greater connectivity, really tapping on the technology advances. And I think even with a decline in CEO confidence this year, the big story, over the 5 years is a more modern and a more connected Asia Pacific, right? They're expecting certain things to happen over the next 5 years. So even to your question about uneven confidence, I think what uneven confidence does for businesses is a better discernment about the opportunities in front of them, right? Discernment and risk return kind of decision making, really being discriminate about the investments you make and the partnerships you enter into. But getting on technology, modernizing businesses, there's still so much that can be done to make businesses efficient, nation-specific. That is going to give you some dividends. Also, with internet technologies, being able to fold in robotics, 3D printing, internet technologies, particularly in the Philippines, where manufacturing still has to undergo some kind of transformation towards high value add manufacturing. That's something that's making people optimistic. So more people are thinking that it's likely to have high value added manufacturing in the region over the next 5 years.
That's great. Thank you, Christina. I think we had another question at the back. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Prince from Philippine Star. With regard to the Philippines, I would just like to ask, how would the election next year figure on the investment prospects for the country? Did you consider it in the business CEO survey? And I understand that the survey was held for the past 5 years, right? So will this be the first time that it will be an election year will be considered?
Yeah, well, definitely the CEOs, when they answer the survey questions, the Philippine CEOs, they have that election in their minds. And I think the fact that they remain optimistic about revenue growth may prove maybe the point of some prophets of boom. They're saying that regardless of who wins in the next elections, that the economic gains of the Philippines are irreversible. I mean, that's from the prophets of boom. And hopefully that the programs instituted by government, investor confidence will be there. I think also that the CEOs are not too affected by the forthcoming elections. Maybe principally because private enterprise, private corporations are so involved in these initiatives. For instance, the Integrity Initiative, which is becoming to be quite strong in the Philippines, asking for transparency and asking corporations to sign in the integrity initiatives. You know, if we cure one end of the stick, for instance, we also cure the other end of the stick. And I think the fact that private corporations believe that they have a big say on what is going to happen boosts their confidence about that they participate in controlling what can happen.
Sorry, how does this fare with the 2013 elections? I understand that you were able to cover it in your previous report. Did you see the same confidence during that time?
You mean in the previous election period?
I
don't think we actually covered the previous election period. No. So this is the first time this survey's actually covered an upcoming election in the Philippines. Also, I mean, the Philippines is not unusual in facing political change and elections. There are elections coming up, obviously, in quite a number of different APEC economies, and we have a new 5-year plan coming up in China. So I think the Philippines doesn't necessarily stand out in facing some political change. Next question. Yes, thank you, sir.
Warren de Guzman, ANC, for Mr. David Wu. Were you able to differentiate in the study the level of concern with regards to geopolitical issues in China compared to the Philippines? If you were, could you just tell us what the ranking is? And again, with the follow-up on the question with regards to the elections, how big of a factor though was the elections actually in the confidence of the Philippines? Was it a huge factor, or was it only a minute part of the study for Mr. Cabrera?
David,
you want me to cover? I think geopolitical risks in CEO's mind in China perhaps is a less element than perhaps outside. More Chinese CEOs are focusing on how to work with the government to implement and take advantage of the next 5-year plan, which actually is more focused on how to alleviate poverty in China, because the next 13-year plan in China is more focused on to actually, build a middle-class society in China, to really address our poverty issue. China is actually a very poor country, not as you see in Shanghai and in Beijing. So that's the first, very important. Second is, on the other hand, the China economy is experiencing significant transformation difficulties. We want to focus on structural change. We want to take advantage of the technology advancement. So in the 13th five-year plan, we have, I think, very ambitiously established a national strategy of taking advantage of big data. We have a big data strategy for the nation. So these are the focus more on the China side to actually, address our own economic issues rather than, raising the geopolitical issues. I'll defer the next part of the question to our senior partner here.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page even in the Philippines. While we did not really isolate that question on elections, forthcoming elections in the Philippines, that's part, if at all, of the geopolitical tensions that impacts on the risks. But I think what's important to the CEOs is predictability. Although there are things that cannot be predicted, they're more efficient now in being able to predict demand or being able to predict purchases. Using big data analytics. They're more concerned and preparing for the effects of advancement in technology, the modernization of the manufacturing process. And if there's something that they want to predict but can't really predict in volatility, that's if the China slowdown is happening, they'd be concerned that the slowdown will be sharper than expected. If the U.S. economy is growing, that they'd like to see that happen, and they'd be concerned if that upswing will not happen as predicted. So it's more on the predictability of what's going to happen and the impact on their business rather than the results of the forthcoming elections that's really impacting on the decision making.
Just to follow on this is a very good question. I think in page 6, if you see what's the implication for business leaders, we actually draw to the attention to the political leaders and the business leaders that great transparency builds trust. So we hope the integrated region and the economy will help the governments to communicate and the business to communicate as well with the government. I think this is a very important message to be conveyed. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, David. Next question. Anybody got one final question? Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Again, I noticed in the survey that it showed that CEOs don't really care about which free trade agreement pushes through. Could you also frame that in terms of a region, or in China or in the Philippines? Is it the same thing, or is it in different parts of the region or the places that are surveyed? Are there actually areas where they actually are, or they actually do care about which trade agreement is pursued?
I think this is a very good question again. So our report on page 22 and the 23rd, number 8, if number 3 from the back, is really addressing your question about the trade agreements. But in CEO's minds, multiple paths for growth and based on connectivities. So if you can have a look, in the in page 23, high hopes on TPP to boost exports in Asia Pacific. But on the other hand, if you see, the Asian economic community itself is also working closely together. So I think it's more on connectivity, more on global cooperation rather than just one, trade agreement. Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, and David has said that we take this to this can be seen by government officials and then can help them in decision making. The Philippines is not yet a signatory to the TPP, and we can't do that yet because the prohibitive provisions in our constitution, the prohibition about foreign ownership or owning land, foreigners owning land, and the limitation on foreign corporations owning land, public utilities. There are certain restrictive provisions in the constitution that doesn't help the Philippines in qualifying to be a signatory in the TPP. Now, with this CEO survey now out there, the Philippines may be more determined in trying to be aligned with the region insofar as its economic laws are concerned.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. Now, I think there probably wasn't a great deal of difference between one country and the next in terms of their views towards trade. I think what is interesting is that CEOs thought that access to broadband was more important than any trade agreement in terms of driving connectivity and growth, which probably says something about the need for investment in infrastructure. Is there any one last question just before we close? Okay, that's great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Alex, in particular, for that helpful presentation. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. If you'd like to stay for 5 or 10 minutes afterwards to ask any particular questions to David, Alex, myself, or any of my colleagues, please feel free. But thank you very much, and here's to a successful week with APEC. Thank you.